And welcome back to Freight Waves Now. Bill Priestley here alongside Thomas Watson. Let's join by Alan Adler, who is joining us normally from Michigan, but today from the West Coast, which means it's just half past dark there in the morning. And Alan, thanks so much for joining us.
Still dark, gentlemen, still dark. And I don't know for how long. But anyway, good to see y'all.
Good to see you as well. So let's talk a little bit about Mack and UAW. Obviously, this is a situation. They had a deal and then it fell through, and now all of a sudden we're into negotiations, part two, if you will. What's going on here? Obviously, there was obviously a sour note when the first one wasn't approved, rather overwhelmingly, and then now they're back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I think what we're doing now, I think where we are, I wrote an analysis Friday that basically got into some of these issues. I think as much as Mack didn't want this to become tied up in the Detroit 3 negotiations, the automakers negotiations, that's kind of what's happened. The numbers that are coming out in the first two agreements there with Ford and with Stellantis both show a 25% raise over 4.5 years. Mack's latest offer, and again, understand these are separate contracts, but Mack's latest offer to the union was 19% or a compound 20% over 5 years with some other, obviously some other pretty good benefits at the time that was put out there. And this was before we had any settlements in Detroit or any tentative agreements in Detroit, I should say. It was seen as a record deal for the truck maker. And I think Mack thought they had something done and stayed out of the glare of the spotlight of Detroit. And it isn't even a spotlight. It's more subtle than that. But essentially now it looks like when they go back to talks and Mack and the union talked on Thursday or talked all week, they got a few things done around local agreements that hadn't been wrapped up with the first tentative agreement. But Mack is kind of sticking to its guns for now in terms of its economic offer. However, with these big offers, these big opportunities in Detroit, and we'll see what happens in ratification voting there, I think Mack is kind of waiting now just to let this Detroit issue get wrapped up, although you notice the UAW took out another GM operation in Spring Hill, Tennessee, right down your way. And I think, it might be a little longer. So at this point, though, we're starting to see some knock-on effects. You've got production at the Volvo Truck North America plant in Virginia is out today, both shifts. They apparently are working the rest of the week, according to what a spokesman told me. But, you're starting to see, because of the other impacts of the Mack truck strike, you've got contracts in Hagerstown, Maryland for engines, for example, that supply both Volvo and Mack. You've got a mess on your hands, quite honestly, and it's going to probably drag out for a little while longer.
And looking at the strategy as well, you had noted that they're kind of waiting to see how the big three automakers go. Is there a concern that if you're Mack, that you may inadvertently have to pay even more if it's a stair-step situation where the Detroit automakers get more than 25%, maybe they're up to 30% now? So hurry up and wait. Is that kind of the right strategy, or is it a rock and a hard place at this point?
Well, Thomas, I think we're getting close to the end of what's happening in Detroit. You've got two tentative agreements there. Again, ratification voting anymore is no guarantee that you're going to get it passed, right? But the voting will occur over the next week, I guess, for those two. GM has to come up with whatever it's going to take to finish their deal. And I don't want to make too big a deal out of the fact that Mack is tied to what happens in Detroit, because it isn't. These companies make, a tenth of the number of vehicles. They don't have the profits that Detroit does. They don't have the number of workers either. I mean, you're talking 146,000 UAW workers at the Detroit 3. You're talking 3,900 at Mack and the facilities in Florida and Maryland and Pennsylvania that are involved here. So there's going to have to be some realism into this. I think you've also got, though, and we saw this 2 years ago when Volvo went out on strike. Volvo Truck went out on strike for 5 weeks. The UAW there, you've got a disgruntled workforce that isn't really happy with its union negotiators, and they tend to take it out both on them and on the company. And I think we may be seeing a bit of a replay of that. We've got this other sort of dint of socialism in the background. You've got a former candidate for the UAW international presidency, Will Lehman, who is, a good pot stirrer. He's right there at Mack and has continued with the World Socialist website to, continue to attack the UAW. And, and of course, it's understood that the companies are greedy, and, that's a given according to the way they think of it. But they're basically saying that, their negotiators are gutless and that they are, in the pocket of the companies and that sort of thing. I don't know how true that is. I don't really think it is true necessarily at Mack or any more than it was at Volvo. But I do think that, you've got a lot of agitation out there, and that can get people to vote no. But I think, if I'm a worker at Mack right now and I see Detroit people getting, 25%, and you're offering me 20 over a longer period of time, I'm going to want my negotiators to do a better job for me.
Alan, obviously, we don't know the details of what's going on here, but one of the very interesting details that came out in the first agreement, that of course wasn't ratified, was that Mack workers, at least the union reps, decided to agree to working a longer workday in certain areas for a little bit more of a stipend in terms of pay. I would have to imagine that that was something that was shot right out of the negotiating room immediately, though, in terms of any ideas in terms of if that was kept or if that was no longer a bargaining point.
You're right, Bill. I'm not inside the negotiations. I don't know what's being offered or being retracted and that sort of thing. I will tell you that there was a lot of anger over that proposal because it did not come with overtime. You took the workday up by 30 minutes, and yet you're going to pay people for that. But now your lunch, I believe, if I have this right, your breaks are paid, but your lunch is unpaid. So therefore, you're not getting overtime essentially for a longer day. And that's one of the things that, the opponents have really attacked. So yeah, that did do well. At least initially. But Mack, and let's talk about why they would want this anyway, they've got opportunity now to perhaps grow some market share, but they're constrained in terms of how much they can build in the plant. You don't automatically add on a third shift because, you can't really support that with sales. But just by coincidence, we're going to be out today here in California driving the new Mack MD electric medium duty truck. This is something I think they've got great hopes for, but in addition to the diesel powered MD, that plant, interestingly enough, which is new since the last negotiations in 2019, is not unionized. And I've wondered all along whether this was something the union was asking for. Certainly at GM, they agreed to bring their battery plants that they're developing under the UAW master agreement. So I don't know. That seems to be something that, would be big in terms of future union vitality to have new workers, about 250 workers in Roanoke, Virginia. But I don't know if that's in there or not. So I guess we'll see about that too. But I do think this kind of went off the rails for Mack.
Hopefully they can get back on track for Mack. Look at that, throwing out puns this morning. Alan, thank you so much for coming on. Definitely going to be keeping an eye on not only the developments, but if I can top that pun as well.
Oh, gosh.
I don't know. Thomas, you continue to amaze me in the punnery, so I don't know what to say.
Well, it's 3rd and long, so we're going to punt it now to a break, Alan. Thanks for coming on again, but don't worry, folks. We'll be right back with more great content coming up.